Generally at CASCW conferences, we always have a panel. Sometimes we have two panels. Today, we really felt like it was important in the structure of the conference to have mainly panels. And the reason for that is, as we already learned as you did your puzzles and we talked about this morning, there are so many different intersections between child welfare and other disciplines who are really working hard to serve kids and families. And hearing from people across all of those disciplines is what today is about, to see what strategies people have, what is working, what have people tried that hasn't worked, and what lessons have been learned. And we learn best from the people that are doing it. And so we've constructed three really amazing panels of professionals that are going to speak to you today, as well as a group of parents and a group of youth. So we're really looking forward to the rest of the day, and we're going to start with a very important panel really looking at behavioral health, and we have a facilitator for each of those panels. So today we're super lucky. I can't imagine many people in this room wouldn't know Sue Abderholden. So Sue is going to facilitate our panel on behavioral health. And as most of you know, Sue is the executive director for NAMI and has been there for almost 25 years. 22, I know, but I want almost 25. I want to keep her there till 25. I don't know if that'll happen. And has just a remarkable experience working in the field of behavioral health, advocacy, policy development. When I think about Sue, I consider Sue my friend, so I'm not going off script here at all. Sue is top of mind, a fierce advocate, and one of the most knowledgeable people that I know about the integration of mental health in everyday life and how the impact of professionals can be helpful and be a hindrance to us at the same time. So we're really looking forward to having her lead our panel. No, you're good.
Well, thank you, Tracy, for your very kind words. And I'm not quite that old yet, so we'll see. And thank you all for being here today. And I do think this is a really important panel. I will just start off by saying that NAMI actually doesn't like to use the word behavioral. We like to say mental health and or substance use disorder, because they aren't really behaviors, they're symptoms. And I think that just kind of messes up our mind when we talk about it. So, but with that being said, we'll still call this panel the Behavioral Health Panel. So we want to start off first by actually having all of our panelists introduce themselves. So let's start with you, Amelia.
Buju, Gichigami Gaboikwe, Anishinaabe Winikas, Makwa Enduram, Gichi Onigamin and Donjabwa, Nagachi Wananginda. My name is Amelia LeGarde, and my family comes from Grand Portage, and I currently live on the Fond du Lac Reservation. I have my early experience as a child welfare worker in tribal social work, and then most recently I've been working at the county for about the last 4 years, with most of my experience until recently being in ICWA. So Indian child welfare, and mostly in ongoing case management.
Finn? And I heard you like to go by Finn.
Yeah, so my name is Carmichael Finn. I go by Finn. I'm the executive director at Recovering Hope Treatment Center up in Mora, Minnesota. We're a licensed co-occurring family treatment program. So for both mental health and substance use disorder, we have inpatient and outpatient services, as well as telemedicine. I've been in the field of behavioral health for over 20 years, but primarily in family treatment settings. I'm a marriage and family therapist and alcohol and drug counselor, so my passion really is about engaging the family around substance use disorders. I also teach at Minneapolis College and Metro State University.
Julie.
Hi, I'm Julie Schultz, and I'm the Executive Director of Main Street Family Services. We are a small nonprofit in Sherburne County, Elk River, Minnesota. I started Main Street Family Services 10 years ago out of my experience working directly with the county. I had been doing supervised visits and parent education for families who were in child protection cases, and the need was great in our community to provide a more robust service mechanism for families to be referred to. And so together with the support of the community, we began Main Street Family Services as a company, not just me doing one-on-one work with families individually. And now we've served probably over 500 families in the past year, and not all within that particular service, but we also provide therapy, and we are really passionate about prevention work.
Thank you. Jessica.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jessica Bernier. I am a child protection worker in Carver County, Minnesota, and that's in the Southwest Metro, for those of you who are unfamiliar. I have about 9 years of child protection experience. My current role is doing assessments and investigations. And then prior to that, also at Carver County, I used to do ongoing case management. So about 4 years of experience in both of those. All of my child protection experience has actually been at Carver County, including my undergraduate internship and my master's level internship. And so I've kind of dabbled in a lot of the different service roles that we have within child welfare. So that includes some work with truancy, occasionally helping with PSOP, and then assessments, investigations, and some children's mental health work.
Thank you. And Judge Kappelhoff.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Mark Kappelhoff. I'm the presiding judge in Hennepin County's juvenile court. So I see probably 80% of my cases, 70% of my cases are child protection cases, and the other 30% are juvenile delinquency cases. My legal career started when I was a public defender representing children in the child protection system about 100 years ago when they discovered fire, when I became a lawyer right away. But I've been passionate about these issues, and now I've been in juvenile court about 6 years, and it's a tremendous place to work, lots of ups and downs. I think we're gonna have that conversation here this morning, so thank you.
Thank you to the panel. You are all gonna bring great expertise and perspectives. And so the one thing I noticed is that none of you just said one thing, right? Because as human beings, there's a whole lot of different puzzle pieces to us. And I think that's important as we look at how we are helping these families. So if you could just talk a little bit about, what are, if we think of all the different kind of programs and activities that these families need to go through and get support from, what's the one that you tend to use or intersect with the most? And anyone just jump in. You don't have to go in a line.
For me, it's obvious. We intersect with Health and Human Services, with child protection. That's our main referral source for all of our supervised visitation.
I raised my eyebrows with that question mostly because I don't know that there's like one single discipline that we interact with as child welfare social workers. And I'm sure that my counterpart here probably can attest to that. And ask that question, I'm like, well, shoot, I don't know, right? Because I sit here with people at the table that are in substance use programs, and that they're a huge part in the child welfare system. And then I sit here with my co-panelist who's doing those supervised visits. And again, that's a huge part of what we're doing. And then we've got our judge here, right? And so to sit here and be like, who do we interact the most with? I'm like, across the table, it's going to be equal, and it's necessary. All these pieces we talk about, puzzles, it's critical that we are connecting and talking and sharing a similar language and shared goals. So you can't pick one.
Good answer. Absolutely. I think one of the things, that we certainly sometimes hear from families too, is that they kind of have this long list. And so it's a lot sometimes and overwhelming. And so how do you help families kind of prioritize, right? I mean, we know we talk a lot about housing first in the mental health field, like if you don't have housing or even substance use disorder, right? If you don't have housing, it's hard to go from there. But if you don't have income, you don't have housing. So how do you kind of help families prioritize so that that long list doesn't become overwhelming and actually kind of frees you up in a way?
Speaking from Recovering Hope Treatment Center, it's a co-occurring treatment center. When we get referrals for families who are struggling with both substance use disorder and mental health, we do try to work really hard with the child protection worker to get the case plan so we can prioritize what we can help right away so we can move things along, because as we both know, those timelines are looming. But we really strive at Recovering Hope to be like a one-stop shop for co-occurring disorders and everything that you might need. So having GED on site, employment help, case management, peer recovery that the family is going to need to be able to stabilize and move from, on the continuum of care into lower levels of care along the way. But certainly as a one-stop shop, we don't personally do it all alone. We have community partnerships with DHS and education and criminal justice to be able to make that happen.
I would say when it comes to trying to prioritize, what we do first, then next with clients, from the perspective of the child welfare worker, it's always child safety first. And then from there, it's really a team effort. I try to ask parents, like, generally, you have a pretty good idea of what the service needs may be, but there's sometimes things that a parent might need to have done while they're working with you that you haven't identified or that they see as a priority. So I think it's important to ask the client for their input in that. And then I also think when you're working with service providers, they are experts in the work that they do. So it's really important to be asking the service providers as well, what are you seeing as priorities for this client? What are the things that you see need to happen first? And then for us, as long as we're kind of prioritizing safety and then recognizing our timelines, how we prioritize that work is really up to everybody that's involved.
Just picking up on that, one of the conversations we've been having in Hennepin County is the issue of the case plans. When the parents get the case plans, right, the emergency protective care hearing, it's overwhelming. They're already traumatized, their children may have been removed, and having them focus on what their needs are. And oftentimes we've seen case plans that are incredibly lengthy. And at some point, the parent just turns off, and you start throwing these things. You have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this. And at some point, they're shutting down. So what we're trying to do, and I certainly try to do, is to pare down the case plan and tasks for that parent in an understandable and achievable way, and focus on really what brought the case in. If it's substance use disorder, let's address substance use disorder. Let's move that to the top. And maybe we don't need the psychological evaluation or the parenting education or all the other things that are necessary. Let's focus on that. If it's housing, which oftentimes, as you all know, that's the linchpin to any success, because I can talk until I'm blue in the face in the courtroom about recovery and substance use disorder. If you don't have a place to live, it doesn't matter what I say at that point. So let's address the housing need, and let's focus on that like a laser beam and address that. And then we can move through the other items. And maybe many of the other items don't even need to be addressed at all. I think focusing in that manner for parents, it makes it not only achievable, but I think they're really engaged because they're mostly motivated, I find, at that first initial hearing. And that's the point where you can really get their attention and explain to them, we want you to succeed, and here's what you need to do. And we don't move the goalposts during the case history. And that's another issue. But I think focusing the case plan on what brought the case in and really address those needs.
I'm jumping in because I'm super excited listening to you all, and then having the opportunity to speak to the collaboration piece, right? And I think that's what this is all about. And I get so excited listening to you all share as I'm over here, and I'm like, a question is like, well, how do we do that, right? And I'm over here, and something that we're doing in St. Louis County is we're doing these case transfer meetings, right? And it happens either before the EPC or just after the EPC, and we are having professionals at that table, and we're having informal support networks at that table, and it's at that time that that case plan is getting developed in partnership with the parents and then all the providers. And what has been huge in that collaboration is then there's this shared understanding, right, about why we're here. And I don't think this comes as a surprise to anyone, but working in this, oftentimes we've got providers who are like, can I have the case plan? Where is the case plan? What are they supposed to be working on? This is super frustrating. And different providers too who aren't understanding why social services is involved, right? And so when we're able to sit down all together, there's understanding about why we're here, and then there's understanding of where we're going. And what's huge to me is like certainly like providers and professionals are experts, right? But the families are the experts in their own family. And these case plans then that are being developed through this process ends up being things that the family is prioritizing and wants to work on, right? And I sit here and my other plug is like things go on those case plans that aren't in your typical cookie cutter case plans of housing and sobriety and psychological, right? Oftentimes we're putting on these case plans that these families want to get back into their culture, right? We're putting on these case plans that the family wants to get their children named. And so things like that are getting put on the case plans that then are getting submitted to the court that are specifically tailored and influenced by all the important players.
Kind of building off of that, because you have everyone at the table, it also might be easier to really understand the barriers. So actually this morning, Department of Commerce just released their first market review of a health plan, and where they can actually show that mental health parity is really a dream and not a reality. I happened to look at my own plan a few days ago, just wondering, and I live in Minneapolis. There were absolutely 0 psychiatrists in Minneapolis in my health plan, and only 3 clinical social workers. The rest were in the suburbs. And so if you have everyone at the table, is it easier then to understand the barriers? Like, you know what, Section 8, right? In 6 years, maybe you'll be able to get a certificate, or there might be supportive housing, but there's a waiting list. Yes, you need to see a therapist, but all of the ones in your health plan have waiting lists and don't have any openings. So how do you kind of address some of those barriers that you're wanting families and parents to do, but we don't have enough resources?
You've touched on a big nerve of mine. It is, and I'll be short, I promise. It is defeating at times to a parent who comes into my courtroom and I say, your case plan includes substance use disorder treatment or psychological treatment. And then I come back in 60 days and they're on a wait list for those services. But the timelines keep ticking. Right? So we've told them, here are the things you need to do to get your child back or children back. But we don't have those services available here in our community. And we don't. The lack of mental health services for families and children is a crisis. And you've heard that before, but I see it play out every day in my courtroom, and it's very frustrating. If I were that parent, and I try to put myself in the shoes of that parent, and this dude with a black robe says, to get your children back, you have to do psychological treatment. You have to engage in individual therapy. And I can't get to therapy as much as I try, as many times as I apply, as many calls as I make. I can't even get an appointment for an intake. You lose trust in the system. You already don't have trust. And then you break down further that trust by failing to provide those services. So that is just a key item that needs to be addressed, because we're not serving the parents and the children in our community when it comes to mental health, and frankly, many other services as well.
From my lens, working for a place that actually solves a lot of these issues, our family treatment program that's licensed. I know many of you have utilized one of the 4 family treatment programs in Minnesota. And I will say we used to have more, and we're going backwards. We only have 4 in the state of Minnesota. But yet I know all of you have experienced what that's like, having your families there, and then they are getting therapy, they are getting psychiatry, they are getting their case plan worked on in a structured place, able to do their home visit, their trial home. And it's really frustrating that one of the reasons why we don't have more family treatment programs, despite better outcomes, despite the ability not to have those kids in foster care, despite the fact that we know for every dollar spent, there's $4 in cost benefits. Minnesota knows this. There is no way for providers to actually get the reimbursement for the kiddos being on site. And so it's like $8 a day or something. And I know they passed something with Title IV and everything, but the legal loopholes that that causes for us because nobody consulted with us, like Recovering Hope can't be engaged with receiving those funds and what that contract means to be able to do that. And it still wouldn't meet the costs of the kids. So basically you're asking programs to do it basically because we know it's the right thing, but there's no financial way that it's sustainable. And so we have to, one of the barriers is we have to invest in taking some of those dollars and really trying to incentivize substance use and mental health treatment programs to do a family model. And that's a tall order because then, you know, the judge can say, go to family treatment and first of all, you know, you'll get the first top 5 things taken care of on your case plan, and you can do so in short order. And so I would like to see us really, we know it works. I would like to see us invest in that.
So absolutely, we know it works, but we never put the money that's needed towards it. So kind of thinking about that, because you said that, you know, families, you know, parents are somewhat kind of penalized by this. So through collaboration, does that help lessen, frankly, kind of the negative impact then on parents because people know that they can't get in? Or how does that work on the real level?
I think so. I think what I've been thinking about while other speakers have been talking is it can be really easy within our roles to think that we kind of know all the ins and outs of each of the different things, right? We just maybe make an assumption. I've done this long enough. I have enough experience interacting with the system. And there's things that we don't know or don't understand about each person's role, each person's ability to interact with the families that we're working. And so when we talk about each person being an expert, that's professionals, that's families, that's, you know, people within the court system. And it's really important for us, especially as the child welfare worker, to not maybe make promises about something that we don't understand, don't have information about. And when we're able to work collaboratively with the treatment program or with the mental health provider, and everybody's on the same page about like that case plan and what the goals are, where instead of saying to a parent or, you know, whomever it is within the case, well, this person's going to do that, we might say, I'm going to call that person. Let's talk through it. Maybe we can do that call together, and let's figure that out together. So I definitely think that when we're doing those calls, you know, either to communicate back, but especially when we can include the parent in that, then they really have a better understanding too of what each person is able to do within the limits of, you know, their role, funding, all those different things.
I feel like, you know, a lot of this is legally driven, it's financially driven, it's insurance driven, and thinking about getting to the grassroots of how do we really implement restorative practices across the board for everyone. And because we know we can't move those systems quickly, it'll take a long time. What can we do now? And I love the idea of being proactive and bringing families and all the players together to make decisions, or not to really make decisions, but to support the family in a reasonable case plan that makes sense for them. But what I find, what my experience is that, like we've already said, there's a list of too many things, and families are running like crazy and just showing up late for supervised visits because they were across town at a therapy session. Like they're exhausted and they're discouraged and they're overwhelmed. And I'm wondering if language, obviously, I think that that's something I've been a part of recently in some grants, is that that language is really important. And changing our view of what we're all about. And because we all have our different track of what we're trying to accomplish. We have a boss who tells us, hey, you have to get these things done. And this is how you get paid. But maybe if we changed our language collectively to that this is a restorative process and that we're looking for the best interest of these children. Obviously, we're looking for safety for them, but we're also know that the best outcomes come when families can be reunified and not end up in a situation where there's divorce or long-term foster care. So I think having mechanisms like what can we do now? Where can we sit now where we can create those opportunities to bring out the best in each other and bring out the best for the family and family group decision making. We already know we have a lot of mechanisms, but what can we do in our area? So there's wraparound, there's family group decision making, there's these care conferences that are happening prior to a lot of the processes being put in place. But I think removing barriers to us talking to each other, because there's a lot of fear about me telling you too much information, HIPAA, all of those things. Like, what can we do to really create that system where we have freedom to say things within reason that support that family restoration? And those are just ideas at this point.
No, thank you. And so this is, this conference is really all about collaboration and partnership. Can you share some very specific examples of like a collaboration that really worked or is working?
I can share one. It was really rewarding. We had been working with the family for quite a while, and it was a very stressful family system. It was a very large family, and there was a lot of domestic violence that had gone over time. And I happened to sit on the mortality review committee, and Sherburne County had been bringing case consults to that entity, not necessarily for it was just to review this case. What can we do? And the people at the table all knew the family. And so they were all able to share. There was law enforcement there. There was myself with supervised visitation. There was, the case manager was there sharing what her needs were, what her worries were. And then everybody else was able to bring ideas and thoughts to the table. And I think there was sort of a relief, like, oh, we're not in this alone. So that was just a mechanism, and it's not a formal one that we do every time for every family, but it happened to work really well.
Right when the pandemic happened, we created essentially a work group, Collaboration Hennepin County, where we met. Actually, we were meeting daily, trying to figure out actually how to keep the court open and transfer, and then ultimately implementing the Zoom system, because obviously we had to keep having cases because we had children who were at home, parents who wanted to be reunited with their children. So it wasn't really an option. We had to figure it out, and we did collectively. And we started doing daily meetings, and we have the county attorney, we have the department president, we have the guardian ad litem, we have the ARS who represents the parents, we have the public defender's office, and the guardian's office as well. And then the admin staff within Hennepin County were there, and we met daily. We eventually moved those meetings back to weekly, and now we're meeting monthly. We continue to meet on a regular basis to address ongoing issues in court, or in the process, or any other topics that come up. And it's really an opportunity for everyone to share and collaborate. And I have to say, it's really a wonderful conversation and demonstrates incredible collaboration and really anticipation of issues. People wait to put issues on the agenda, and we work through them. And we've managed to create, I think, a tremendous working relationship among all the court partners to address ongoing issues. And then if we need to, we'll create subgroups out of that to address specific issues that might arise. So it's really an example of how we're all in this together, and the way we operate together in Hennepin County. I'm really proud of that, and it really demonstrates such professionalism and that common goal that we're all in this for the positive reasons to ensure that families and children are safe. So it's a great working relationship.
So up north, we have some pretty positive collaborative relationships with our supervised visitation center and with our tribal partners. And asking for a specific example, I think about, and it's a repeat example because it's successful, right? And so this repeat example is we can have a client coming in with a substance use disorder concern, right? And so like we'll ask them to do a comprehensive assessment or a Rule 25. And because of these relationships with our tribal partners, we're able to get services oftentimes sooner than having to send them down to do walk-in Rule 25s or comp assessments, right? And then also what we've done is we've embedded a chemical health assessor within the agency, so they're accessible as well. And these examples have resulted then in sooner assessments and then an ability to engage in those recommendations. And I think it was you, Judge, that mentioned that our parents show up at that first hearing highly motivated. And so when we're able to get those services implemented and those assessments completed as early as possible, we're able to piggyback off that momentum and keep it going.
You talked a little bit about the barriers families might face in accessing the services, but what are some of the barriers other than data practices, right? What are some of the other barriers in terms of working actually together, with other organizations and facets of government?
For one of the things I think that
I think we got about 30 minutes for that one.
One of the things I find really fascinating about our systems is that you can have like the mom have just like all of this stuff around her, but the rest of the family members, there's like all these different silos. And so one of the things we've been trying to be much more mindful and collaborative around, and what we found really helpful is maybe dad or boyfriend or fiance or someone is not part of the main case plan, or for whatever reason doesn't want to engage with a particular worker. And so we're trying to come from like the back door and maybe make connections with their probation officer and bring them into other aspects of our treatment. So even though mom and kiddo are in our residential care, trying to get the partner who's going to be in the picture, let's face it, in our outpatient program, or at very minimum, family therapy services, or be part of the kiddos therapy process with one of our therapists on site, at just like any kind of engagement to start bringing these siloed networks together of various family members and then their workers or their involvement with criminal justice. And we've found that to be incredibly helpful. Also, like actually seeing bigger picture other than what this person's lens is the problem in the family, and this person's lens feels like this is a problem in the family. You start to see a little bit more of, okay, we really need to hone in maybe on big MI, little CD, even though maybe from like a child welfare perspective, because of what happened with the CHIPS petition, it feels like big CD. But with all of the partners in play, you realize, okay, there's actually some really big mental health things interplaying here. So that's been something we've been really trying to be mindful of, and having conversations with child welfare workers about where is partner, who else is involved, that we can strategically get involved, even if they don't want to have contact with you. So I'm sure you guys are used to that. So.
I was just going to say that's our experience too. We are often asked to build bridges where, when child protection gets involved and families are very adversarial, we can be a buffer and we can really be a support to those child protection workers by helping to build some of those bridges and soften some of what that feels like to the family. For us, if we can have a conversation with you as a child protection worker, we are feeling like we are really part of the team. And I think recognizing that nobody really wants to do this all alone, like it's really doesn't feel good. It also doesn't feel productive. And so when I can have a conversation, or one of my staff can have a conversation with that child protection worker to understand the needs of the case, ideally, we would love a warm handoff. Before all the COVID things, that was our goal, is that for every family that we were going to serve, that we would meet directly with that child protection worker and that family and collaboratively it was just the three of us having those conversations about what's the county worried about? What does the family really want? And those were really great collaborations. And that also then gave a lot of trust between agencies. That, hey, we are really all working hard, and hey, if I have a need, I'm getting some feedback and some understanding of what does the county really need for us to be doing right now. And then also then they're hearing our experience, and that really should be validated in that it can help drive things forward or send things in another direction. So then after that initial working with the family, and you start doing your case consults regarding, what's next steps for these families, having clear directions. Sherburne County does signs of safety. A lot of you do. Having those trajectories are really helpful for families because we all know where you're going. And then we can really help support the ultimate goal of reunification.
One barrier, then a solution. In Hennepin County, when UAs are ordered, there's one location in the entire county where parents are required to go drop UAs. It's at HCMC. So if you live in Brooklyn Park, you have to take 1, 2, maybe 3 buses to get there. Try to work, try to have childcare or bring your children with you. But there's only one location in Hennepin County. That's, to me, is just not serving the parents well. And that's an enormous barrier to parents to get there. And to hold down a job. I would challenge any of us in this room to be able to do that on a regular basis. So the solution, which just started a pilot I think it was about 4 months ago, they have a mobile assessor now that will actually go to the parent's home and do a swab. It's a great solution, breaks that barrier down. The compliance rates are very high. The preliminary results right now show very positive interaction with the parents because you're meeting the parents literally where they live. And then getting the information you need rather than requiring them to take 2 or 3 buses to drop a UA on a random day that you don't even know whether you're going to be called. So it's a problem, but I think there's a solution in the works.
I had a lot of thoughts while others were speaking, but something that was talked about earlier was kind of collaboration within disciplines, and what I was thinking about is relationship. And really, I mean, that's one of the best tools we have. And so when we lack relationship, that creates a barrier for our clients. I think that, when I know service providers, when they know who I am, when I'm calling them to either ask to consult or ask about making a referral, they because they know who I am, they're more likely to be responsive to that. I think with the activity that we did earlier, right, of I think there are 9 puzzle pieces. So here's the 9 different service areas and who are the 2 people. I mean, really building relationship and then lack of relationship creates a barrier for our clients. So I think I'll just touch on that, but I had other thoughts too. So
I think that too, so in addition to relationship, there's this pressure, I think, for child welfare workers, especially in county agencies, feeling responsible, right? I think feedback that I've received before is like, that's great, but at the end of the day, it's my name on the court report and it's my judgment that's going to be called into question. And so there's a challenge then, right, for us as child welfare workers to be willing to step into these spaces and partner and give it a shot. And I think, and I hope that what is heard is that there ends up being benefit to doing this and to being willing to step into a brave space and be vulnerable and share this. And then, the big piece too that we'll have to get figured out, not today, but is there's a system that perpetuates that, right? The system perpetuates that responsibility falling on that social worker's shoulders. And when something goes wrong, we always want to figure out why it went wrong and whose fault it is, right? And so there's that pressure, I think, for child welfare workers, knowing that there's all this responsibility. And what I hope we move towards is this recognition that when we share that responsibility, it's not so heavy and it's not so scary and it's not so intimidating. And then I think that we're all here because we care about children and we care about families and we want to see good outcomes. And so if we're coming to the table with those families, other service providers, and we have a shared understanding that that's why we're here, we're going to be working towards a shared goal. And then there's needs to be like this willingness not to be turfy. And it's such an odd thing to me because I had the privilege and honor in my internship about 10 plus years ago to sit in Judge Tarnowski's family court. She had a family court, and we would sit there with the mental health provider and the probation officer, the judge was sitting there in the chambers with us, the guardian ad litem, and any other professionals that were a part of that family's case, and there would be discussion. And I'm like, gosh, this makes a lot of sense and it works really well, and look at this super great outcome. And then I come into this work as a professional and not as an intern. I'm like, well, this is not how it happens. But it can happen, right? And it takes, I think, and like, I don't want any of my fellow social workers to like find me out back after this, but it takes us as fellow social workers being that connection, right? I sit here and I'm making an assumption, but I could be wrong. But what I hear is I've got partners here at the table who are like, we want to partner with the child welfare workers. We want to know what's going on. And so like, we're super busy. We have a lot of responsibility. Now we got to form relationships. But I'm here and I'm like, if the goal is good outcomes for our children and our families and our communities, it takes that work. And ultimately, then it decreases the work for us, right? Because we're sharing the load.
So I think we have a new word in our vocabulary, turfy. I like it. I think that's great. Very relevant. In the mental health and SUD space, there's been a lot of discussion about treatment being more culturally informed, more culturally responsive, trying to bring in traditional healing practices. So how might interdisciplinary work in child welfare start to really embrace that as well? And what are the barriers to making that happen?
I'm talking a lot. And I'm sorry, but I'm like, oh yeah, let me answer that question. And the question is like, how do we bring it in, right? And it goes back to something similar to what I was just saying. Like, we have to trust that those in the community have the answers, right? And again, that's scary because many of us are raised in a Western way with traditional education, and we know that we can look at research and know that there's good outcomes based on these interventions. And we've got cultural ways of being that isn't researched. And so can we utilize that? And I look at my sisters over here and I'm like, I think these women over here can attest to the fact that when we return to our cultural ways and traditions and practices, that like we see positive outcomes for our families, right? And there has to, again, be this willingness to be looking to our tribal partners and to be looking to our community experts and like sharing that power, right? And so that's the challenge. But then again, we're achieving positive outcomes for the families and the clients that we're serving.
I totally agree with that. And one of the things we have in Hennepin County is we have a specific courtroom, ICWA courtroom, dedicated to our ICWA cases, which are held there. It's a culturally appropriate setting. We've gotten great feedback by it. We have smudging that goes on in the courtroom. And we've had feedback from families who have experienced that. From the first moment the case is open, they get to go to a courtroom that's culturally appropriate, trauma informed, and it's a way to really start off on the right foot. And we're very, very proud of that courtroom. And we have all the flags of the tribes there. We've had dedication ceremonies in that courtroom. It's really a special place. If you haven't seen it, if you're in Hennepin County, you should come by and see it. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful setting, and the feedback we've gotten has been really tremendous.
I think one thing that's important also to keep in mind is I only know what I know from both my professional and lived experience. So I have a lot of privilege. I am a white, cisgendered, heterosexual, able-bodied. I mean, it goes on and on, the privileges that I have. And so when I'm working with a client who has a lived experience that I can never understand, it is my responsibility to seek out somebody who can help me meet them where they're at within that lived experience. And so that means sometimes it's as simple as doing a Google search to see what providers are out there. Sometimes it's knowing what agencies may have those connections and can refer you to someone else. But it's really important that we not just assume that the lens that we bring from our background is the lens with which we then practice. It's really our responsibility to make sure that we're engaging our clients with where they're at, with the perspective that they bring.
I think at Recovering Hope, we really, try to incorporate whatever the client informs us they want to incorporate into their treatment process from their culture. But I also think it's really difficult because there are barriers, specifically in state law in a lot of different areas, that make it impossible for parents to choose things for their own culture in our treatment program. For example, parents are not allowed to co-sleep with their children. And I don't know if this passed, and maybe somebody else on this panel knows because this was talked about, but they were overhauling the safe sleep statute because it wasn't like you couldn't cradle board. And so I don't know if that finally, I know they were working on that. I don't know if that passed, if anybody's aware of that. You couldn't use a cradle board. You couldn't, and honestly, I don't know what culture hasn't accidentally even co-slept with your child. So, or maybe it's just me. I'm in a room full of child welfare workers, all mandated reporters. He's 9, it's nightmares, it's fine.
We're in Vegas. What gets us here
stays here. But that's just the ridiculousness of it, is that then the liability of then even, you're in an emergency room basis, a person's given birth, and you have to have a nurse come in and constantly say, okay, it looks like you're falling asleep, let's move your child. And so even if you want culturally to do those things, and there's so many other areas in our laws which doesn't give you the flexibility to parent your child the way that you feel you want to parent your child based on your culture, how you were raised. And those are areas that we need to deconstruct and look at.
Can we talk a little bit more about what are those areas? What are those things that need to be changed? We've heard the co-sleeping. Are there some other areas as well?
Well, lots of areas in parenting. And I don't even know if I can speak to all of it because I don't know it all. But, there is a very Western way that we parent. And then there's many other cultures that are here that have very distinct values, and we can't know them all. And so trying to figure out ways that we can learn from each other and being respectful and mindful that not everything is child protection. Sometimes it's just about differences. So being able to live in that world where we're a little bit more informed and making efforts towards embracing others' experience and values.
Yeah, I think this is really high level, but there's in the SUD world, there's this big, huge movement around microdosing. It's mental health and SUD actually. There's a lot of research right now on ketamine and other psychoactive agents to help with both withdrawal symptoms and with mental health, like depression, for example. Well, all of that has its roots in indigenous knowledge, and it's not cited like that. You got a bunch of white people who are like, oh, we just figured out this helps with depression. And this is really ancient indigenous knowledge from all over the world. There's a new one, it's a plant from Ghana, and you've got a bunch of white people coming in and actually doing stuff to the land to get this psychoactive agent, and they're bringing it over to the States to do research on it. And they're like, we found the next big thing for substance use disorders. And right now you've got clients who are in certain cultures who are like, it is okay to take certain substances with a shaman or a medicine person. And now that it's on the market, they're like, I think that's okay for me to do. But then you've got child welfare and stuff who are saying, well, no, that's a psychoactive agent, or you have a substance use disorder. And so there's, again, this tension, and now it's even more complicated because, you've got a certain sector of Caucasian folks who's like, no, we're going to prescribe this, or it's okay. So the state, the laws don't move fast enough. But at the end of the day, all of that was originally Indigenous knowledge.
I'm jumping in again. And I'm going to be painting a bigger target on my back if I haven't already, because there's a question about like barriers, right? And I'm like, a barrier that is, we can address it, and I believe that we can do something about it, is racism and discrimination and bias, right? And and like, I sit in this space today, and I was like looking before I said this, and I was like, this is the like most people of color I've had the opportunity to sit with. And you know, I had just shared with my colleague last night how coming from a tribal space into the county, while like I'm grateful for the path that I'm on, like oftentimes you're alone, right? And I, again, am in a space where I'm like, I think that we're all here because we all want to do good things for the families and the children that we're serving, but then there has to be this recognition that there's this lens, right? And I don't think anyone in this room would stand up and be like, I am racist. But I think that also there are probably, if not in this room, then within our agencies, individuals that are like, no, I don't have bias, or like this choice and decision to rule this case in or out has nothing to do with stereotypes, has nothing to do with racism, but it does, right? And so there's a need for agencies to be aware of that, and there's a need for agencies to be investing in the staff so that there's conversations being had on it, and that I'm not like in a space where I'm like, oh guys, like please again, don't meet me out back after this. And where it's like okay to have conversations and discussions, right? And where people who are comfortable hearing that, and then like not only hearing that, but it doesn't end there, right? Like there's progression towards doing better. And so that's a need within the child welfare system for our families.
Thank you. So we have a few minutes for questions. And so just kind of raise your hand if you have a question for the panelists.
Oh, well, the Zoom, sorry, Teresa. Thank you. So the whole time you guys have been talking, I've been thinking about one of the most problematic things that I saw as a child welfare worker, and it was related to behavioral health, right, is a psych eval with a parenting assessment. And I can't tell you how many times as a tribal social worker I've fought against a parenting assessment because I saw them used in the most damning ways for our families. It was like the decision was made before the assessment was ever done. And I think, speaking to Amelia's point, it was absolutely influenced by bias and racism. So could you talk a little bit about like how do we address this, right? Like how do we say that a parenting assessment is most often inappropriate, if not cruel for some of our families? And what else can we do, right? Like, I think that's such a big systems change piece. And if you could just talk a little bit about that from your perspectives, how you've seen it used, how we can do differently.
I've seen it used at the end of cases rather than at the beginning, and where it speaks to the idea that it's damning, right? Because we already made the decision and now we're going to prove it for court. And so I think looking at that from a different lens and as a tool, that would really help us have better outcomes, but they're expensive. And so, you know, we're not willing to put the money in to do it up front because maybe things would be different. But I think maybe there's a version of it that wouldn't be cost prohibitive, and that would give us better direction for families as to how, like from my lens, we're providing the supervised visit. We're with families probably a minimum of 3 hours a week, because we're also doing parent ed. That's a lot of time that we spend watching a family interact with one another. And if we had some of this upfront data that could really help us understand what their learning style is, what their needs are, where they've come from. And, you know, it has to be kind of done at like a good time, because often at the very beginning, even though people are willing, they're still really struggling with their mental health. They're really struggling in their addiction. So they're not quite ready to like really be the best version of themselves. So it has to come at the right time. But if we wait till the very end, it's just a tool to prove our point. And it's not really, it's a way to win a case rather than a way to really help the family.
In behavioral health, we have client rights. And one of the rights the clients get is to choose their own provider. And I have always wondered what would happen if clients were able to choose from amongst the, 1,000 or so child welfare workers. Like, you have a case, here's the ones that have openings, because I think clients would lean towards choosing workers that felt like they connected with a little blurb, just like you do when you pick a therapist. And that right away the client would start out with buy-in, right? The families would start out with buy-in of like, I chose this worker as opposed to being forced upon me this type of situation. So I thought about little changes, and obviously that would have big implications, and that's really difficult, but just little shifts of like, how can we do things so that families are driving the train? Because like, as Amelia said and other people have said, they're the experts on themselves, and they know what the problem was that led to their involvement. Even if they're not saying it out loud to you, they know. And so they can be part of that solution.
Your Honor?
You can just call me Mark. It's easier. I don't have a robe on. I think that it goes back to one of my initial comments, which is, why are we asking for that, right? Why? And I ask a lot of questions in court, and for those of you who have been there with me, I ask a lot of, why are we doing this? What's the reason? What's the basis for it? And why are we doing this in the first place? And if there isn't a good reason to do it, it shouldn't be ordered or required. And that's my view of it. And addressing the issue of disparities, I think is an important issue that we don't talk about enough, the disparities in the system that we have. Hennepin County, we have a new initiative working with the Village Arms workers, working primarily with African American families to help provide additional support to them, culturally appropriate individuals who work with the families, in addition to the other service providers out there, which I think is showing good results. But I think it's an important thing we need to be aware of. And I learned of another issue regarding disparities in the system, and the disparities begin at the outset. And as I understand it, the number of reports from mandatory reporters, there are disparities right there at the outset. So before you even see the cases, there are more reports of Black and brown parents into the system before they even get into the system. So you're inheriting the disparities, and then they end up throughout the whole system. So it's something we needed to go upstream and prevent some of these cases, or not require or have those cases end up in the system in the first place.
So I know we're just about out of time, but I know you're chomping at the bit, Amelia. So go ahead, you get the last word. Go for it.
Okay, to answer Teresa's question, I'm over here, I'm like, we share the power, right? And like my colleagues have shared like big picture kind of changes, but I'm like, we can't overnight change the fact that like courts are going to be ordering psychological evaluations, right? But we can influence the outcomes of those psychological evaluations by ensuring that like it's not just us as the child protection workers that are like giving the feedback, right? We can be ensuring that that psychologist has information to the guardian ad litem, to that client's family who knows that person outside of the system, right? And so that's an answer to your question that we can do like tomorrow, is making sure that releases are signed so that we be sharing the power.
So please join me in thanking the panel, not only for being here today, but for your work.